come in. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we had a title for this before. I knew it was going to be about product because that's what I love. Sybil came up with a great title, Finding Product Focus, because I've been writing about that. I had to change the title a little bit after I wrote the presentation because it ranged a little further, it got away from me, it ranged a little further afield. So what I'm calling it is a product-focused, centric journey through the startup lifecycle. And I'm Marc Meyer, and I've had a 40-odd year career here in Silicon Valley, starting with my first professional job as a programmer, writing the payroll and accounting system for the engineering department at Berkeley. Yeah, we had to write our own accounting software because you couldn't just go out and rent it for $10 a month. To now that I'm no longer 17, Berkeley Skydeck. In the meantime, I did a couple of things. I got a graduate and undergraduate degree at Berkeley. I was there for 10 years. And I did research at 4 different research labs, including I was in the Smalltalk group at Park, I was at Digital, at Interval. I've been a lecturer or a researcher at 3 universities. And I've worked for a bunch of companies, but particularly proud of, I've done 6 startups. 3 of them were exits. Not all of them were great exits. That's a secret. You know, when people say they exit, it doesn't mean they made money. A lot of the times it's because they didn't make money. But I did have one IPO, which is TIPCO, which is still around and has a valuation of about $5 billion. And I helped start that at the Berkeley Rep building, which was 2 blocks away. In the meantime, I've done everything from being a developer to chief architect, a computer scientist, you know. I've run product, I've run technology, I've run engineering, and I've been a CEO 3 times. I've also done a couple of stints as a venture capitalist. I've invested in probably about 20 companies, and I've advised, well, maybe 50 companies or more, really lost track. The things that I'm going to talk about today are sort of an outgrowth of 3 articles that I wrote that are available on Medium. There's quick codes, QR codes for these articles. They're Startup Life, Finding Your Inner Purpose Part 1 and 2, and Getting Your MVP Right. And those have both more detail and less detail cover. So I'm going to range a little bit broader than that. At the same time, I think there are details in those that make it worth the read as well. What I'm going to share with you today is firstly some framework, and that's some scaffolding, intellectual scaffolding that you can use to when you find yourself in situations to sort of understand the situation you're in. It's kind of theory a little bit, so you can sort of figure out which way you're going and where you are. Methods and best practices that I've learned along the way. History, I'm a strong believer that history is important because if we know where we came from and how we got here, we'll avoid sort of looping back on ourselves and making the same mistakes. And this is something that when we move fast, we often forget. In the educational process, I think. It's also fascinating. And then lessons, so hard-earned lessons. A lot of these were learned very expensively and through failure, which is the way lessons are. And like every parent or teacher, I want to tell you what I did wrong so that you won't have to go through that and skin your knee. So what are we here at Skydeck to build? Somebody throw something out. What are we building here? Business?
Yeah.
Hey, are you looking at the slides? And in particular, not only a business, but a venture-backed business. Your cohort team, you've taken some money from the venture fund. So whether you knew it or not, you're now making a venture-backed business. What are the parts of a successful venture-backed business? Because an unsuccessful one misses some of these parts, right? But if you're successful, you're going to have a product or a service, something that you sell. You're going to have to sell it to customers. You're going to have customers. You're going to have a large market that you may or may not dominate. It needs to be a large market. You need to have defensibility so that somebody doesn't come in once you've built the business and copy you and take it away from you. You need to have a fast growth path. And you need to have revenue. It's not really earnings or profits, because today there's a lot of companies like Uber and so on go IPO, massive unicorns without, while still losing money, right? They'll make money somewhere else. And then because it's a venture business, you're going to have a large exit. Why fast and large? And by the way, if people have questions, just jump in and stop me, okay? I'll ignore you and continue. So why fast and large? That's the VC mantra, which is go big or go home. And that comes out of the business model of the venture capitalists. And I'm sure that some of you know this, but I think it's really important to keep in mind, because being that you're a venture-funded business, you're going to have to comport yourself and have a plan that aligns itself with this model. So venture funds are time limited. They have a lifespan of normally 10 years. In those 10 years, the venture capitalists have to find small companies or find companies. They have to incubate them. They have to give them a little bit of money, then they give them more money, etc. And the company has to exit pretty much in that 10 years. If not, it's a little bit of a problem. Venture funds usually have a fee structure that's called 2 and 20. So they charge 2% management fee. In most venture funds, they kind of spend that, so it's not a big deal. In the billion-dollar ones, it's probably they still spend it. And then the 20% carry. And how many folks here know what the carry is? Okay. It's sort of not everyone, so I'll tell you. So the carry is if I raise a $100 million fund, and eventually the fund settles, I return the $100 million, and by the end of the lifespan of the fund, I have $150 million. That extra profit, that $50 million, I get to keep as the fund manager. I get to keep 20% of that, so I get to keep $10 million. That's where venture capitalists really get paid. There's also a big political issue about that these things are subject to capital gains tax. That's one of the things that's talked about very often in the American tax system. The Berkeley Skydeck Venture Fund gives half of that back to UC Berkeley. So that's how we create value for Berkeley. Venture capitalists make many risky. I should turn on my timer. Venture capitalists make many bets, and depending, early stage venture capitalists make many risky bets. Late stage venture capitalists make less risky, large bets. But by and large, they make many risky bets. They're tiered, so we spread around money at the beginning to a lot of companies that are in the stage you're talking about. At the next stage, we reinvest a little bit more money on companies that have proven themselves, and that continues, right? Venture capitalists get paid only on exit. If a venture capitalist asks you, how are you going to create a company? You say, I'm just going to create this company and keep it forever. You have to know that you're telling them I'm never going to pay you back, right? So you should not say exactly that. It is a characteristic of venture that very, very few home runs make up all the returns. And that means that venture capitalists don't care about your company just petering along, doing well enough to pay the bills. They want you to go big or go home. They want you to go fast, fail fast, and get big. Fail fast. They don't want you hanging around taking money and attention if you're not really on a ramp. They would rather you spend it and go away. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question for. You mentioned that your background was in software, and I think a lot of VCs traditionally have focused on software. You mentioned the fast growth rate. For other different industries, could be like biotech or advanced materials or things like that, do you still see this same venture funding model applying well to us? Do you see VCs still sticking to the same sort of model, or have you seen any sort of like wiggle room in terms of how people try to apply different business models to different industries?
I think there's a certain amount of wiggle room, but it's not so different. If I understand the situation, there's nothing that says that I understand it particularly well. But if I understand the situation in things like life sciences and so on, which I don't do a lot of, and material sciences, it's really like the traditional venture model was used for semiconductors, right? And these things that had 10-year development cycles where you had to build billion-dollar plants. And so it's still the same, and they still want these big exits. So to a first level approximation, I think so. There may be exceptions. You should know that my pointer doesn't work. You should know that, is that still okay?
It's still a slide 14.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, I think I need to go there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, venture isn't the only model, okay? For you guys, it maybe is because you've taken some money, you haven't taken a lot of money yet. So there's something called a lifestyle business. Perfectly good businesses, most businesses in the world are lifestyle businesses. That can be something where you start a company, it's self-sustaining, you may be making $20 million $20 million.
I'll get 80.
Okay, you may be making $20 million of revenue and taking home $3 million a year. It's a perfectly great thing to do. You're beholden to no one. It's not going to make you a billionaire, but you can live really comfortably. That's a lifestyle business. If you do something like start a restaurant, you don't pay off your investors in your restaurant when you sell the restaurant. You pay them all along the way. So that's partnerships, profit sharing. There's other sources. Some companies are crowdfunded. That's a successful way to go. You can do loans, grants, SBIRs, government grants, small business administration grants. That's a perfectly good way to start a company. And you can bootstrap yourself. Bootstrapping is about you create a product, and you create a product quickly that has a market, you sell it, you start to generate some revenue, some reputation, and you iterate. You build something bigger. Back when we started Technicron or TIPCO, which eventually became TIPCO, we bootstrapped that. We had very limited, we had some venture funds, but it was very limited, 750K, and we had to sort of make do with that. We found bigger and bigger contracts on Wall Street that eventually allowed us to build a multi-billion-dollar business. But it's not the traditional, that's not what but the important part is that if you find yourself doing some of these things and you're looking for venture funds, there's an impedance mismatch. You should not do that. You can't go to venture capitalists and tell them, I'm building a lifestyle business and you should fund me and then get your money back. That's not going to work. Okay. Who can we get
Yeah,
Justin
he's
to?
going to replace your batteries.
Oh, great. Thank you. So, question. Who here knows what their business is going to be? Show of hands. You know what your business is going to be. Who here is pretty sure they know what their business is going to be? Armin, I think you know what your business is going to be.
But I think it changes though.
Yep.
No?
Pivoted already since we talked like 2 days ago. Okay, great. So you guys are too smart for me. It is a trick question, okay? So these people all knew that they had a business. I don't know if you recognize them, if it's big enough. Ev Williams, founder of Twitter. Stuart Butterfield started Slack. Kareem Hurley-Chen, they started YouTube, okay? Now these guys, they knew they had a business. But they thought that business was something other than what it turned out to be. Ev Williams started Twitter as something called Odeo. Odeo was a very early podcasting tool. Stuart Butterfield started Slack. It started out, the company was called TinySpec. It was a game called Glitch. It was his third failed attempt at building a video game. It was a massive failure. People were using the communications inside the inter-player communications inside Glitch to talk to each other. Eventually they repackaged that and that became Slack, which of course just IPO'd. And I didn't know this, but Kareem Hurley and Chen started YouTube as a dating app called TuneIn Hookup. Hello, hello, hello.
Yay.
Okay. Okay. And these people are pretty good at this stuff. These are pretty smart people. I mean, before Ev Williams, before making Twitter, he created Blogger, which was one of the first very successful blogging platforms that was sold to Google. Stuart Butterfield and Katerina Fay co-founded Flickr, which was eventually bought and killed by Yahoo, as they tended to. But Flickr changed the way all of us today share pictures. That didn't exist before Flickr. That was Flickr's idea. And Kareem Hurley and Chen were smart enough to sell YouTube to Google for trillions of dollars. So the observation is that frequently founders think that they have identified a business. Okay? Just about as often, they're wrong. And we all fall prey to this sort of bias because that's how we start. We start with an idea, we want to apply it to a business. We start with that. So what are most of us starting with? Well, if we look at the what I call the startup life cycle or the startup journey, I would say we're here where that Google Maps dot is. Most of you here, most companies I've ever started, because I'm a technologist, we start with a technology, okay? And there are other aspects of a business. I'm gonna give a little bit of a definition. So technology is an innovative process or a method for doing something that's new, that's cheaper, that's better, that's faster. A solution is the application of a technology to a recognized problem that somebody has, that somebody is willing to pay for. So that's a solution. A product is a packaging of that solution into something that acts, a program or a service. And in order to be a product, it also has to be reliable. It can't be breaking all the time. It has to be usable. You don't want to be tearing your hair out, or people won't use it. And then there's a term I've coined to capture, I call it suitability. And that is really about if you're going to be doing insurance underwriting, you have to have a tool that fits into the workflow and the mindset of somebody doing insurance underwriting. So that's a subtle thing that goes into a product. A business is all of those things, plus the ability to sell it, a business model which allows you to sell it for more than it costs you to make it, right? And again, because we're a VC-funded company, we need a growth path so that we can continue and satisfy the VCs and get stockholders, shareholders, and then eventually an IPO, eventually an acquirer, an exit. So these are, each one of these stages of the journey has a transition, and I'm going to take them one at a time. I'm actually going to talk about the ones that have to do with products. So I'm not going to talk at all about how you exit your business, how you find an acquirer or an IPO. I'm not going to talk about how you find customers and have growth and revenue and earnings, etc. I'm going to talk about the ones that have to do with where product comes into it. So the first, technology to solution. So in order to take a technology to a solution, we need a couple of things. We need to pick a domain or a vertical that we're going to work in. It has to be, either banking or batteries, right? And then it becomes more specific than that. And within that domain, we have to pick a problem that we're going to address, and then we have to validate the existence of that market. That is, we have to find out that if we have a solution and we make a product, somebody's going to want to buy it. So I'm not going to talk about the market existence validation. I'm going to talk about these first two things, which amount to what verticals and problems do we go after, and another question that I think is super important, and I'm going to treat first, which is, do we explore or exploit multiple verticals in parallel or one in depth? Do we try to do multiple things? And that first article, Finding Your Inner Purpose, Part 1, is all about this. And the reason I think this is important, because as founders, and I've fallen prey to this any number of times as well, okay, there's a huge temptation to multi-target, to address multiple markets, to address multiple problems. Our technology, after all, is really good for a variety of things. So we'll have a bigger combined market. That means we'll have multiple revenue sources. And it leaves our options open. So if one doesn't work out, we have more chances of we still have one left. That's valuable, okay? So do we do that? Well, I argue very strongly that we don't. And so now I'm going to give you a little bit of framework. So how many computer scientists or people who study computer science are there here? 1, 2, 3, almost nobody. What are you? That's interesting.
In Silicon Valley, how is it possible, huh?
No, really. Okay. So this is a kind of nerdy explanation for why I think you shouldn't do multiple things at once, okay? For the 4 computer scientists here, there are sort of 2 major kinds of deterministic search. When you want to search for a solution, search for something. And that is a shallow and wide search, like on the left, it's called breadth first search, and a narrow and deep search, which is called depth first search, okay? And if you think of those trees as kind of where businesses might lie, the exploration path to get to a viable business, those are represented by these stars here. There's 2 trees, one for each search strategy. You'll notice that great businesses lie deep in the tree. And the reason for that is kind of obvious. The low-hanging fruit has been picked. If somebody could just go into life sciences and sell a $1 trillion worth of stuff without doing much work. They'd already have done it. So the great businesses are going to lie deep. And if you look at that depth first search, that narrow focus search on the right, you see that it gets to that number 3 where there's a great business. It gets there faster. Okay? So now if you think about, if you think when you're exploring down one of these lines, you have your technology, right? But you also need to do, now you're approaching a vertical, approaching a problem, you need to have a bunch of other skills. And these are things that we think about generally a little bit late, but you're going to need things like domain knowledge. That is, if you're in life sciences, you need to know about that. You need to know how your product is going to interact with the process. You need to know how to talk to your customers, how to market them and message to them, talk to them in the language they understand. There might be regulatory issues that you have to be aware of and jump through hoops over. You need to know who your customer is, where to find your customer, and what your customer responds to, what their incentives are. You need a business model where your customer will actually, according to that business model, pay you, and that might be a complex business model. And you need to have sales. And sales very often requires salespeople or sales organizations that have reputation and contacts in an area. So all of these skills, they're very specific, and they're specific to the area that you're going into. So the second key observation here is that although the technology, you can reuse the technology that we built, it's over on the left, it's got lots of colors, because it can be used for all of these things that you're considering. Technology is reusable, but all of those other things, they are generally pretty specific to the vertical that you're going into, right? And so exploring multiple verticals at once, the technology maybe you can tweak it a little bit, but the rest of the stuff may even require having a totally different team. So exploring multiple verticals at once is extremely expensive. And the risk that you have if you're exploring, let me explore a couple of things before I go deep, trying to find something, is that you might die what's called the death of 1,000 cuts, which is you're trying to do too much, and you run out of steam, and you never get to a viable business. Aside, when you are doing a deep exploration, this corresponds to that maxim, fail fast. Once you realize that you're in an area that's not propitious, you don't go any deeper, right? So if 3 hadn't existed there, you wouldn't go down further because you'd realize, and that translates to, as founders, when you're having difficulty, when something seems not to work, you've got to balance your desire to drive through it, which is necessary all the time, with the realization that you may be in a dead end, in which case the best you can do is get out of there quickly, okay? Pivot. Okay, so hopefully you are now totally convinced that you should do just one thing, focus on a single vertical and refine. So what happens when you get it wrong? Not if you get it wrong, because we will get it wrong. So you prune early, we talked about that, fail fast. When you pivot, you try to pivot while keeping your maximal reuse of that investment of those other skills that we talked about. And it's likely that good businesses are going to lie close to the path that you've chosen if you've chosen a vertical, a well-chosen vertical, right? So that begs the question, how do we do that? How do we choose a vertical well? What verticals and problems do we go after? So you know your technology, and now we need a process to try to figure out where are we going to apply it? What's the one problem and one business that we're going to apply it to? And for that, I'm going to suggest a method, and I've written that up in this Startup Life Finding Your Inner Purpose Part 2, and there's also a companion worksheet that helps you automate this, or just helps you guide you through this. And I'm going to go through these one at a time. The first thing you're going to do in this method is you're going to write 1 or 2 paragraphs that describe your technology, your IP, your secret sauce. Keep it very short. This is just to remind yourself what it is. But very importantly, you keep it independent of any idea of its application, and you keep it independent of unfair advantages. An unfair advantage, what's called unfair advantage in a startup, is actually something that you need to have. I'm sure advantages are important. They're access, reputation, Rolodex, special knowledge. And these are super important. They just come in later in this process. And so I want you to keep those independent at this point. And these 1 or 2 paragraphs are just going to be there to help you evaluate multiple verticals independently of the founder bias. Then we're going to try to come up with a list of verticals. And I suggest that one come up with about 10 different possible businesses. You may know that some of them are not going to work, but the idea is come up with a bunch of them so that you can start to experiment. And there's a few good ways to do that. One is brainstorming. Brainstorming is just a group ideation, people throwing ideas up and capturing them, ideas that are a little more wacky, creating ideas that are even more wacky, very little filtering, no filtering at the beginning, so that you can start to uncover outliers in the idea space, right? And then later you prune, brainstorming. You can use associations. You can look at your description. What are the nouns? What are the things? What are the things you do? What are the verbs? What do those also apply to? What area do they suggest? Adjacencies. You've got a new technology. It's better than something. The thing that it's better is the old technology that it's replacing. What was that used for? That's an adjacency. You build a better mousetrap. Okay, now that's a mousetrap, so you may catch mice. But maybe it's used as a paperweight too. And the last, which is actually super important and given a little short shrift by founders, is ideas from others. You have to socialize your IP. You have to go and talk about your ideas to smart people. And most founders have the question, comes out of a kind of paranoia. They have the question like, should I be secret? Should I tell these people my idea, right? I'm going to suggest to you there's this saying, things are 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So that really refers to the fact that ideas are pretty much a dime a dozen, and the execution, the creation of the idea, bringing it into the world, that's really what's difficult. And that's true even of like Einstein's theories and Darwin's theories and things that are a little more complicated than things we're starting our businesses with. So I would say you should not be secret. You should go out and talk to your colleagues. Yes, if you're talking to a competitor who's exactly in your space and ahead of you, you shouldn't tell them your secret sauce. But if in a 5-minute conversation with somebody they can steal your idea and make a better business, then you don't really have a business. Okay, now we've got 10 different possible businesses that we've generated. And now what we need to do is we need to evaluate those. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort of perform an inexpensive and yet, yes, broad, lightweight exploration of those businesses, mostly conceptual. So it's mostly a thought experiment with maybe a few interviews and maybe some customer verification, but minimal experimentation. It's a shallow prototyping of the business. You run through in your mind what's going to be involved if you want to create this business. And you're trying to get a rough quality estimate for a bunch of criteria. And now this is an eye chart. This is 2 columns, so that's 2 ideas that are in this worksheet that I've created. I'm going to take that first one and I'm going to fold it over so you can see it a little better. Is that sort of visible? Yeah? Okay, so there are criteria on the left. There's like 12 criteria. Then for each of those criteria, you're going to be scoring things from, if it's really good, it's +2. If it's really terrible, it's -2. If it's neutral, it's 0. And then this spreadsheet is going to give you a score for each of these things, and at the end you're going to get a full score. And the sorts of things, I'll focus on a few of them. They're explained in great detail so that you can do this yourself in the worksheet and also in the article. But the first things are, we've described our technology. Here what we're going to do is we're going to describe the opportunity. And I've stolen some of you guys' stuff here, though I disclaim knowing anything about the internals of these actual markets, or these actual ideas. What's the solution replaced? What's the market size and accessibility? That's sort of obvious. How many customers can you engage, and how easily can you engage them? What's the profit potential? The team item is very important. Is how suited is this team to this vertical? Because you might have a wonderful team, but now they're a team that's life sciences and you want to do actuarial stuff, and they don't know the statistics, and so they're a great team, but not for that, right? Sales cycle. Sales cycle is sort of how long does it take you to get one of your products into market. Perfectly good businesses can be built out of a $9.99 product that an engineer can buy with his own credit card or her own credit card and start using today. A perfectly good business can be built out of something that requires a 1-year sales cycle to a CIO and then generates hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. Both very good businesses. You have to know what business you're in and the characteristics of those businesses in terms of time, in terms of who's going to be in terms of investment, are very different. On the top right, entrenched interests. So I'm going into these because these are things that I think are going to affect your business when you start to think about these things. Entrenched interests is who is affected by your entry in the market, not in your customer, but outside. If you're trying to, for example, if you're addressing mortgages, the bankers are affected by your trying to disintermediate, take over their business, right? And so the recognition that, and so this is a way of quantifying who are you going to go up against. If you're going up against big tobacco or the government or bankers, that might be a slightly negative thing, right? By the same token, if government and somebody else really wants you to succeed outside that, outside your customer, then that's positive. Roles and capabilities is sort of the same thing, but inside the business you're selling to. If you're selling to into a company where IT is going to get a big benefit, but finance sees no benefit, and finance has to cut the checks, that's going to be a problem. And then the last one I want to talk about is team passion. That's a very important one because, again, if the team, you may have a great product and a great chance to make money on something, but if the team really doesn't care about that, they're not going to get out of bed to do it, you're never going to succeed. So that's an important item. And so at the bottom, what happens is you get a score, and that score will be ranked among all your alternatives from green to red, so you know what according to your evaluation of these things, what the best opportunities are. Where do those scores come from? You can customize these scores if you want. Right now, what I've worked out is reasonable. Your mileage may vary, partially because your own values may vary. But the scores for the -2 to +2 for these different criteria, they're all individual. They're neither linear nor symmetric, and I think that's important. It's a realization that, say, for example, in profit potential, the third column, a -2 is really negative, because if there's no profit potential, that's really bad. But strong profit potential isn't as positive, because even though it's positive, there's nothing that says that you're going to be able to make that profit. It might be a competitor. Similarly, some of the others, and you're welcome when you use this tool to try your own weights. Finally, we've got a list of vertical opportunities. We've winnowed that down, and I would say pick the 20% highest, and then delve deeper. For each of those criteria, go think about it a little more. Maybe do a couple more customer interviews. Think through. Talk to people who are working in that field, so you get a little more skinny on those things, and rescore. But it isn't really about rescoring. It's really about thinking a little further on those things that are your maximum potential, right? And at that point, I suggest you get unanimous team or founder agreement about the one thing that you're going to work on. And that's in order that somebody isn't left on the side with their pet other thing that they wanted to work on, and they're working kind of half-heartedly on where the rest of the team is going, and they're working on, building flying umbrellas. Okay. Any questions? Am I going too fast? Right. Okay. So now we know what we're going to. Now we know what we're going to go towards in terms of we know we have what our solution. Now we have to build. We have what we're going to solve for, the problem, and now we've got to build a product. And for that, there's a concept called minimum viable product, which provides product validation. Who here is familiar with minimum viable product? Okay, again, a fair number of people, but not everyone. So before we had minimum viable product. So before 2003, product development, as well as software development, was sort of more like a moonshot, okay? Because we had to buy servers, we had to build everything, we had to build databases, we had to, well, to use the moonshot approach, you had to, you know, build a rocket, you had to build a lunar lander, the moon was going to be somewhere totally different by the time you had to plan way ahead. Because you had to do all of these things, you had to plan very rigorously every step of the way. And in software development and product development organizations, there was an approach called waterfall development, which did all these things like requirements analysis, specification, design, coding, all of these things followed one after the other without informing one another. So all the plan, there was a master plan, like building a Nautilus submarine. And when you finally got into market, because it was so difficult to get into market with the product, when you finally got into market, it might not have been exactly what the customer wanted, but because it was so hard to get into the market, they had to take it because there was nobody else there. And that's why customers were buying hugely expensive ERP systems, SAP systems, banking systems, all of these things that were never quite right for them, but they still bought them, okay? Today we're in a very different position. To follow on the space metaphor, today you just rent rocket space on a SpaceX, and if you want to see what it might be like and whether you will succeed in your business by putting a Tesla up in orbit, you can do that cheaply because you didn't have to build the rocket. Okay, on the product side, we have all these platforms that let us do this land and explore. So there are things like continuous integration and other software processes. There are things like cloud services. There's things like advertising platforms that let you go out and find and explore your customer to see if they're really there and what they're willing to pay. GitHub and open source that allow you to reuse things that already exist. Something like Test Flight, which is for iOS, which allows you to take your idea and very quickly and very inexpensively put it in the hands of people, okay? So the codification of that sort of started this thing called the lean startup. And it was really started by Steve Blank, a professor at Stanford, and then it was codified in a book in 2011 by Eric Ries. And on the software side, the analog to this lean startup is the lightweight development methods like Agile. And the idea there is you would have an idea, you would isolate the assumptions about that idea, and then you would create an experiment that tested that idea against the market. And then you would iterate. And so instead of this waterfall where we know everything to begin with and now we're just grunt execution, this is really about we have an idea, we're going to build something that tests it, the minimal thing, and then test it and then come back and do it again. And the practical instantiation of that is this concept, minimum viable product, and on the product to business side, this thing called product market fit. Minimum viable product, probably the first person who named it that was Marc Andreessen, who probably has one of the biggest brains around, and that's why he has that very strange head. But Marc Andreessen is the co-founder of probably the gold standard of new venture capital firms, Andreessen Horowitz. He's been around forever. In the very early days, he wrote the first graphical web browser, the precursor of Chrome and Safari. So everything that we live in today, he wrote the first one. I worked on that a little bit. And he built Netscape. That was one of his first companies. Then he built a bunch of other companies and now owns the world, Andreessen Horowitz. So he wrote in his blog, this is a historic blog, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's been archived all over the place. Makes great reading, blog.pmarca.com. He wrote about entrepreneurship, he wrote about startups. It's still very, very valid. So the minimum viable product was the concept of an encapsulated smallest feature set that will allow you to experiment on a product's need and its market. And that is implementing as little as possible. And here what's important is to be blind to the founder's big vision. Now, when a founder thinks of their product, it usually has all these, it comes to you sort of like, it starts with a kernel, but then it grows to be all this beautiful shrubbery that's around it. And all these things that make it delightful to use and how it works with everything else and so on, right? And so in order to build a minimum viable product, you kind of have to, for a moment, lose that founder mentality and decide what is key, what do I need to test? Because if I make multiple fonts and multiple colors of something that nobody wants, it's not going to help. And this is what this is intended to isolate. And there's an article, Getting Your MVP Right, which is just about this. So one trick to when you're building a minimum viable product is when you put together the product, you want to get unanimous consent on what features you're going to include in the product. And that is because you may feel that having it in purple is really important, but your co-founder may be a little more reasonable and go, no, I don't think that's important. I have another thing that's my pet feature. And so between all the founders or between the team, you're going to sort of settle on a minimal set. There is a more formal process that I will suggest, and that is take all the features or functions of the product as you envision it, and write them down, all of the ones you think will inspire the use of your product. What's going to make people love your product? And then for every feature in that, you're going to ask yourself, if I left it out, is that the thing that will make people stop using it? Did I just take all the value out of it? People will not use it. I'm not saying it won't be convenient, it might not be inconvenient to use, it might even be a pain to use, but will that make people not use it? If that's not the case, if people will still use it, although grudgingly, then you take it out of the MVP. It'll come back in later when you build your full product. You test that and you repeat. So the poster child for the minimum viable product is something I think we've all used, right? So Craig Newmark, who was a programmer at Charles Schwab in 1994, created Craigslist.org. Everybody use Craigslist? Everybody raise their hands so I can see everybody raise their hands. Great. The thing about, so it's the poster child for minimum viable product because he came up with the first version, and after that it really never changed. And it never had to change. It had one font, which was like Career, it's really never changed, even though many companies have started thinking, oh, I can do this and it'll be nice, or I'll put pictures, whatever. Never took off. And yet, it made Craig a billionaire and a great philanthropist, and it totally destroyed the newspaper advertising industry and changed the business models for newspapers. The newspapers used to monetize on ads, that's no longer there, now they're subscriptions, right? Which is probably a good thing. But this is, so the post, you may never have to go beyond your MVP. So keep Craig in mind. Okay, yes?
Is there a difference between B2B and B2C MVP? Like, for example, for B2B, like customers might be like a little bit more cautious, things like that. So is there a difference?
There's probably a bigger difference on the product than there is on the MVP, because remember what the MVP is, it is really intended to test whether there's a need for that product. And so whether it's a customer that needs it or a business that needs it, the kind of feedback is going to be similar. I'm sure there are going to be subtle differences, yes. The product might have a very different life cycle.
There's a little holder question that a few people answer, which is how do you get someone to test your product in the beginning, in the very beginning? How do you get someone to actually use your product?
Yeah, there's a number of answers to that. In the MVP, there's a number of answers to that. And I might refer you to the article, which has a little bit more, but certainly friends, meetups, your fellow entrepreneurs, you can trade off being each other's guinea pigs. Find customers, find people who have that problem. It's just like marketing, it's just like customer identification. Find people who have that problem and have them try it. Do not do what a friend of mine did, which is they signed me up to test some banking platform. And I said, great, I'm going to go on it today. And she said, good, because we're going to make the new rev comes out tomorrow. I'm like, why would I do that now? Right? And of course I never went back to it. So you're right, it's definitely a challenge. Yes?
Perhaps as a corollary to this question, not in a B2C, but in a B2B product, and you want to test out your MVP, will you talk a little about what are the right customers to test it out? Like, you don't want to go to the biggest organizations first. You want to figure out who are the right customers.
Yes.
Are there some guidelines around that you're going to refer us to, or if you're going to talk about any of them?
No, I wasn't going to talk about details, but I think that's a very good question. Again, the devil is always in the details, right? So I'm trying to tell you sort of where you are, what scaffolding is, but how do you find those people? So potential clients, these things very often are, you go to meetups, you go to conferences where these people with this problem in need of what you think is their solution, you talk to those people, you show them, you maybe show them demos. If they're excited, you set them up with a demo, right? Other places that you can go for that sort of thing, you can find, so one good trick, and I give you some references in the article, one really interesting trick for customer validation is you articulate your solution, you buy ads against it, okay? And so you buy ads on Google or something which have the keywords that somebody with your problem is looking for. That redirects you to a landing page. That landing page talks about a product that doesn't exist, right? It's your MVP, but you haven't actually built it. And it actually may be your product, but you haven't built it, right? And then you get signups, right? And one thing that's been done very successfully by companies that wanted to create hype is they'll do these gated signups where they say, sign up now, you're getting on the queue, and we'll give you a beta as soon as possible. And then when you go back, there's a countdown, and there's 100,000. You feel like when this happens, I'm going to be really happy. And in the meantime, you're building something to give them afterwards, right? So, bunch of tricks. Okay. So, kind of the last part. To go from product to business. So what you need is, you need customers, you need growth, you need revenue, you need eventually earnings. I'm not going to talk about that part. I'm going to talk about this concept of product market fit. Which is also kind of a lean startup thing. It was first articulated by Andy Ratcliffe, who started Wealthfront and is now managing director of Benchmark Capital, a big, very successful venture capital firm. And he articulated it in terms of team, but it's come to be stated more often in terms of product. And in this Gary Larson cartoon, there's a fellow who's reminding himself that before, he has to put on his pants first and then his shoes, because the other way around doesn't work. And so similarly, product market fit says first the market and then the product, okay? And the way Andy Ratcliffe puts it, when a great product meets a lousy market, good product, terrible market, the market wins, you don't sell. When a lousy product meets a great market, the market wins, so you do sell. But when a great product meets a great market, something special happens, and that's product market fit. And that's when suddenly things are on rails. You really start to sell. So just like MVP is a way of optimizing the fit and testing and optimizing and iterating over the fit between solution and product, product market fit optimizes the product with its customer, your problem, and the business model. So this funky diagram is intended to show you that you're iterating on the product, improving the product, at the same time you're testing and iterating on the customer. So iterating on the customer means your customer may not be the right customer. You may not be messaging right. Your business model might not be right. And when you get you are trying to dial both of these things in to get this sense of product market fit. It's something that doesn't lend itself to an exact methodology, or at least, one hasn't been really articulated, but there are characteristics of it that are really important or interesting or illuminating. So Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup book, he tells you that product market fit is the moment when a startup finally finds a widespread set of customers that resonate with its product. And my friend Eric Saton, CEO of Tango, and before that CTO of Dino, talked about his experience. And he put this in a way that I thought was very illuminating. He said, before we had product market fit, we struggled to sell. After we had product market fit, we struggled to meet demand. So suddenly, instead of going from pushing, you're like pulling, right? Alex Schultz, the Facebook VP of Growth, says the number one problem I've seen for startups is that they don't actually have product market fit, but they think they do. and this is totally true. I think I've fallen into this trap. All of us have fallen into this trap. We think we're there. We're just, it just isn't, the purple isn't the right purple yet, but other than that, we've got it, right? And the reason it's important to really know whether you have product market fit or not, and to recognize when you don't, is because what you do after you have product market fit as a company in terms of development and growth of the company is very different from what you do before. So Sam Altman, ex-CEO of Y Combinator, one of the most famous and first incubator started by Paul Graham. Paul Graham's writings, if you haven't read Paul Graham, read everything he's written. He's brilliant and really articulate. So Sam Altman says, until you get to product market fit, you want to A, live as long as possible, and B, iterate as quickly as possible. And so you're trying to spend as little as possible, again, think MVP, and you're trying to figure out why something isn't working, fix it, change it, as quickly as possible. In the early days, CEO of Twilio, in the early days of a product, don't focus on making it robust. Find product market fit first and then harden. And so that, I think, codifies this idea that you actually don't want to try to be too big or do too much until you've got a kernel of something that really works. Okay? So,
Can I ask a question?
yeah, please.
So one thing I found that's caused some tension in the past is this method versus, when you're pitching for investment, you're putting together projections and mapping out your phases, and you're painting this picture of near-term growth. So how do you get investors on board with, hey, I'm going to be messing around and iterating for a while, when they want to see how you're going to hit 20 million in 5 years?
You've also been looking at my next slide. No, you're absolutely right. So the question is, how do I balance this idea that I don't have product market fit yet, so I shouldn't be doing something big, with the idea that investors want me to come and tell them how I'm going to take over the world, right? Absolutely. So that's kind of one of the last ones on this slide, but it's on this slide, so I'm going to address it right away. I would say the major takeaways of some of this journey that we've embarked on together are most of you have a technology and you need to build a business. You will iterate and pivot, so look for those opportunities where you think you need to pivot. Don't hang on to something that isn't working too long. Be aware that that's something that's not just about your technology or your first ideas. Second, maintain single focus. Attack one problem at a time, one market, address one market, use one business model, one pricing model, find a single audience. Do you have
So regarding timing on one market, maybe we can discuss details later. So for example, we are getting traction from one market, which is oil and gas, for example, in our case, right? But the sales life cycle is long, where this is long, 3 to 5 years, for example. On the other side, you have, for example, another market, right? So, but the oil and gas looks like they're pulling. Okay, let's do it. Let's follow up and work a project, make a project, and so on. But yeah, then how you balance this? That context.
Exactly. So you're saying you have an opportunity as a startup. You started one road, and somebody comes in with a much bigger carrot that they're showing you, and you have an opportunity to address that as well. So the purist would say, no, you're on one. You either close this one off and go after that one, or not. I would say you want to balance that. These aren't absolutes, but I think what you do is, to the extent that you can, you pay psychological attention to both. That is, you take meetings, okay, and you try to flesh out those opportunities. But you don't commit large numbers of resources to anything but the path that you're on. Okay, you may go take a meeting, you may go talk about something. Most of those big, for one thing, when you're a small startup, a lot of big potential customers will come to talk to you because they like to talk to you and they hope to buy something from you someday, and they'll tell you they might buy it from you today. Rarely is it the case. If you have a startup that's you and your dog and your Mac, and Exxon comes to you and says, well, I think your stuff is great, I'm going to give you $100 million, they're never going to trust you because you might take off. So you could talk to them to learn something, but keep it in context of how real is it. Once in a while, a real opportunity presents itself, and then that should be the moment where you change horses, and then you go after. So you evaluate it lightweight, but resist, because as founders, we're often talking we're talking a broad set of potential customers, partners, etc. Most of those are smoke. You can learn a lot, don't change what you're doing. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
It's difficult. It's
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah.
I'm not saying don't
How
pay
to
attention.
answer this question? Like you have to
Ask for money. Ask for money. Ask for money early. If they're serious and you think, well, I'm going to abandon my business for the business you want me to do, you should give me money today. You should give me a contract. If you're not willing to do that, I don't see that business right.
Then how it does translate to from investor point of view? For would it be investor to have the business which has long sales life cycle to go in the first customer longer but bigger, or faster, smaller market? It's kind of
It's a good question. Let me finish this slide and then refer to that, because this talks about it a little bit. Okay, so single focus, MVP, build the minimum you need to prove out a product. If you think you need to build something, stop and think about what can you build that's smaller than that. Because you're saving runway, you're saving fuel for your startup. Use lean start methodology, test, fail fast, learn, pivot, repeat, cycle. Iterate your product and your value proposition, your pricing, your messaging to get to product market fit, and only then expand. And that word expand is important. I'll come back to that. And then venture means fast and big. And this is Laura, is that right? This was Laura's question.
Great number.
Thank you. Not true. Venture means fast and big, right? So how can we do little things, right? Well, it does. So venture is fast and big, and you're going to have to be fast and big, but not before you hit product market fit. And so what I would tell you is that these big, grand efforts to take over the world are super important, and they will happen in the growth stage. Initially, that vision, that big picture, that is super important for investor enthusiasm. It's super important to convince your investors that you're going after something big, that they're going to be billionaires, or that you're going to be a billionaire. Your company is going to be a unicorn, right? It's very important for that. It's also very important for your team so that they know where they're heading long term. They're here working on something. They need to know what the North Star is, because if there's something that sort of distracts them here, they need to know, well, I'm still going to be going over there, right? So that's really important. However, you can't address those big picture questions in actual code or product initially. What you should do instead is you should find a place to land and expand. And that term means I'm going to look for something, a solution where I can put this into place and be successful and get customers and acquire a reputation and revenue, which allows me to take on all those things that are accessible from there. A bunch of stable steps. Okay?
Do you think it's okay to omit financial projections in early stage pitch decks then?
That it's okay to what?
Not include financial projections?
So the fashion on that changes a little bit, but I think financial projections are important, because what financial projections do, you see, investors, how much time have you spent thinking about your startup? Ballpark.
Not much, I just
Okay.
started a few months ago.
That's not the answer.
95%.
However long you've spent, somebody give a big number. A year. Okay. Founders dream, sleep, eat their startup. They think about all the minutia, right? An investor, you're going to ask them, and they don't know anything about your startup. They don't know anything about your field. You're the expert, right? So you have to show them why, big picture, it's important to be there in that startup. And that's partially, what are we going to do that's good for the world? How are we going to build something big? But mostly it's about what kind of money is available eventually. And so what financial projections do for an investor, the investor never believes those financial projections. The one thing you know about financial projections is that the real number is not going to be anything like the number on the financial projections. Financial projections, when somebody invented Excel, it was just like, okay, 20 years. Right? And the world is not like that. But the investor will feel good about the fact that, you know, you have a plan, it kind of makes sense, and if that plan were to happen, you would know the components. You filled in the components. You know how big this market is. You know how much it's going to cost you to buy paper for that. You know what the components are. You know how many people you're going to have to hire, or at least you have some idea you can handle that, rather than just like, well, I want to approach that. So that's the financial projections. I've taken you from a product. This is kind of the end of our journey. I've taken you from Skydeck to the Nasdaq. Not really, because we didn't get anywhere close to the Nasdaq. Really, we didn't do a lot of all that money stuff and the customer stuff. We didn't do. But that's the journey. This is a QR code that you can use to find this presentation. I think it's also, Gordon just put it up on something, and it has pointers to other things. It's definitely important if you want to master this stuff to go, and you don't have to read it, but clap on my medium things. No, not for me, but my articles so that other people read. No, just kidding. And then, yeah, any questions?
I have another one, but I've already went through.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Yeah, over on the left.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I appreciate if you could talk a little bit about when your product depends on another product. So for instance, we're building software, it depends on hardware to run it. And even though people love the software, they're wondering, okay, how long should I wait for the right timing to buy it? Because I'm waiting for the hardware to update.
Give me a little more context.
Okay, it's augmented reality.
Yeah.
And there's only two big players. There's Microsoft HoloLens and there's Magic Leap. So people know that Magic Leap is going to come out with a Magic Leap 2. So they say, well, why should I get into this now when there's going to be better hardware?
I got you.
So the way we're trying to approach it
Yeah.
is by trying to get some kind of a deal from Magic Leap that if we can bring customers in with their existing equipment, that they'll get a discount on upgrade.
So I like that. So the question, do people hear the question? Have people heard the question? Yeah, good. Generally, when you have to depend on your timing on something else as a startup, it's a very bad situation to be in, because a startup has a set runway, right? And you're barreling down the runway, spending money, etc. And you're hoping that some other company will intersect the runway at the right place for you. So you do want to try to do everything you can to avoid being in that situation. You mentioned trying to make your stuff work on the legacy and then allowing a transition path from you to the new. And I think that that's a very good technique for getting around that problem. It may be sufficient, it may be insufficient. It may let you get in with at least get into market with people who have the current instantiation. In the case of Magic Leap, I think their product iteration cycles have been, they're a company that, you know, huge hype, 700 million or billions raised at this point. No clear idea of what that magic is supposed to be.
Yeah,
and so depending on their, you know, coming out with a product so that you're going to survive is really, you want to try to make yourself independent of that as much as possible. Laura?
Okay, so
Okay.
another thing I think is a struggle with putting out an MVP is that you're then spending a lot of your time serving customers instead of building your product. Specifically for me right now, I'm really struggling with the decision because I haven't even started building the product yet, and I found customers who are so hungry, they want me to start working with them now. And I feel like I could start working with them and do things manually that my software would do in the future, but it's obviously going to take a lot of my time. I'll learn a lot about what their true needs are, but then I won't be building my software solution because I'll be so busy serving these new customers. So how do you balance the customers draining your time and having to have the infrastructure to serve those customers when you haven't even really built anything yet?
Yeah, the question is, how do you deal with the fact that when you build an MVP and you put it out to your customers, you're going to have to service all those customers, and then you're going to take away time from building the next thing. The MVP should not be a product that's going to go into the marketplace. The MVP should, in the case of your customers that are really desirous of having something that solves their solution and try your solution, I would suggest that what you want to be telling them is, I'm not charging you for this. This isn't a product. This is an MVP. This is our concept for the product. We want you to test that. There's a period during which we will gather input from you, and then afterwards we're gonna make the real product. We'll put your name on the box and acknowledge you. I'm basically saying you don't want you can't afford at that point to tie them into your MVP. Your MVP will change. That's not your only customer. It probably will, So these are not really your customers. They're your testers.
So it's just like a testing burst, and then you
That's what
quit. It's not like
the
an
MVP is.
ongoing customer.
It may be ongoing tests.
Yeah.
Yes, and an MVP again can grow into the product, and it can grow into the product. Depends how strong the customer is. When we built TIBCO, I was the chief architect for a product that was the world's first fixed income trading floor in Boston, and our client was Fidelity that wanted to go digital. It's the world's first digital trading floor, and so we built this for them, but they were our one client, and they weren't customers so much as they were our testers, and eventually that's what we built for them, right? And so it is important to have the right partners, especially partners in an area that's deep, like whether it's banking or life sciences or something. If you can find a big company, something, and here, this is a really good trick. If you have a new technology that can revolutionize an existing industry, if you go try to pitch it to the CEO or the CTO or something, these are folks that are invested in sort of keeping the company going. You find somebody under it, you find the SVP of innovation, or somebody who their choice is like, okay, I can sit here and stay, or the VP of innovation, I can sit here and stay at this level and just do what the company tells me, or I can bet my career on this great new technology, this super team of men and women that are going to provide me with something that's 10 times better. And if it works, I'll become, CIO. And if it doesn't work, I'll go get a job at, the next bank, doing something else, and I'll have a reputation for creativity. So you want to find those partners in like a B2B space.
If I might, when we talk about one, we're going to have one target customer, type of target customer. One could be everyone who lives in Berkeley.
Yeah.
It could be everyone who lives in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
So how do you define the one?
The reason you want one customer, you obviously don't want one customer either.
Right, I know that.
Yeah, so what you want is one kind of customer.
Right.
And what I mean by kind of customer, remember in that thing where I said you had marketing and where the customer lives and regulation and those things? You want one customer that you can reach using one technique that has one need, that has one language. Because, again, from my own career, I built this thing in 2005 where we thought, well, all of these different people can be our customer and they can do all of these different things. And when it came down to write down what any one individual should do with our tool, we were extremely vague. We needed a PhD in our product to know what to do. And it was novel, right? And that didn't work. So we built this product. It took us 4 years to build the product. We got 4,000 users in 4 years. We ran out of money. We threw away 98%. So we did everything wrong. We threw away 98%. And on our own dime, we kept 2% of the product. And we went like, we're going to talk to this one customer, bloggers. Now, for bloggers, it was very clear the only thing that they could do with our product. And we put it out there, and within 4 months, we had 1 million users. This was pre-Facebook days, and we sold the company. And the only reason we did that is because we threw away our big picture, and we started too early on doing the really big picture, and eventually we had to, go, well, it's not only, we can't only transplant hearts, it's also a pen, right? And so this is how you use the pen. People are like, that pen is pretty cool. Okay, we'll buy the pen.
If I have a B2B2C model, right, it's reasonable to segment the MVP in 2 stages where I test independently the value proposition, the pain points on the B2B, while in parallel I test what's the final consumer perception about that solution.
Yes, so the question is if what's your name?
Rodrigo.
Rodrigo has a B2B to C business model. Should he test both of those things separately? I think yes. I mean, we'd have to get into specifics of that, but I think it's really about, that's good, testing methodology. You want to test things orthogonally so that they don't affect each other. By the way, I have office hours on, I think, August 7th, so if people want to ask more questions, we can stay for a little bit longer, but you can also come back and tell me your secret sauce, and then I'll tell you.
If you're pre-MVP, let's say you're in a prototyping phase where, as you said, no working code, you're showing people pictures and sequences. And let's say you go to a potential partner, big enterprise partner. What are guidelines, or how do you position that? Because you don't want to lie and say, hey, this is ready. What are conversations that you see that work? Just so you're setting expectations, you don't want to ruin your credibility.
So if you don't have a product, you're selling vaporware, and you go to partners or potential clients, and they really like it, what's the best practice? I think it depends on how far away it is.
Yeah.
So again, I wouldn't say that I encourage you to lie per se, but give them a sense of the possibility of what you could do in a time frame that you could do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell them this isn't working at all now. It's really just a PowerPoint presentation I came up with in your office lobby.
Sure.
So there was an example at TIBCO. We were pitching Nomura on program trading.
Yeah.
And this was the first platform that we was going to do program trading, and we didn't have anything. And what I built is I built this simulator that just ran through a canned file of displays, and it showed you all this program trading going on. But it was really just a movie, right? And the people from Nomura were like, we need that. Can we buy it? Can we take it home now? And we said, no, we're working on it. This is the concept, and it will be this much investment and 8 months and so on. They didn't end up being our client, but I think that is key. You want to inspire. This is what Elon Musk does. Half the time he's up there going like, I have this great car that I can, and everybody's putting down money, and that car does not exist. So you're creating the future, right? Don't lie, but.
I got you. That's great. Thanks.
So when you show the MVP to the client, like what do you try to figure out?
When you show the MVP to the tester,
Yes.
what are you trying to figure out?
Yeah.
Well, the MVP embodies a set of expectations that you have about people's desire to do this. So if my MVP was something that was like a pill that allowed you to turn your hair red, and I would say, you want to try it, you use it, your hair turns red, and you go like, I don't care. Okay, I've tested my MVP, right? So it's there to test your beliefs about why your product is viable and why somebody cares. The question is, do they care enough to use it?
Shouldn't there are also like guidance saying that you should figure out like how much they want to pay for it and like.
Yeah, it's true. You eventually have to figure out how much to pay for it. So none of these categories, this isn't math. So none of these categories are, when you introduce pricing, when you introduce business model, none of these things are set in stone. But I would say, before you need to become aware of the value of things to people and then how to price it. But you don't want to do that all at once. It depends where you are. If you've already gotten a sense that they want it, you can certainly ask, right? And then I go into these articles like what kind of pricing models, value price models or competitive pricing models that you can apply to start to understand. But that comes later. That's really not part of the MVP. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. I have